Hey everyone, got a bit for you this week. Maybe I should save this off for other podcasts, but we'll do a good chunk of it today. And maybe we'll get into my bird feeder setup next week. But I wanted to talk about the K2 that I just got. It's a Creality printer. It's their flagship printer. And as part of it, it can have up to 16 colors. Now, this is how 3D printing works. The filament has to go in and go to the head. When you want to change colors, you have to retract the filament, which means printing some of it out of the head to clear the head and retracting the filament back to the spool. With the ender that I've got, to do that, I have to do that by hand, right? So that means I have to hit retract, collect the what a lot of people are calling printer poop, which is this little spiral of filament that has to come out of the head to clear the head. And then you have to manually pop the tube out, pull the filament out of it, put new filament in, either on your spool or, in my case, I've got a heating drying unit. I'd have to pull the filament out of there, put the new filament in, feed it through the tube, feed it through the sensor, up through the other tube, into the head, and then I can get back to printing. It's a long process, right? The CFS system that Creality has takes 4 spools and handles both the warming and the drying of those spools. So you don't have to worry about anything at that point. In addition to that, each of these spools, which are in on a plastic spool, as opposed to the cardboard ones that the Ender is using, have an RFID chip on them, which means that the unit knows what color is in which slot. One CFS unit can take 4 colors. You can put 4 of these units together and make up your 16 colors. But the big thing I wanted to talk about for the CFS isn't just the fact that you can do that, but it makes it so much easier to work with your printer. Now they've got a new one coming out that's got a CFS unit on it. A CFS will allow you can use multiple colors in there. You can use the same color in there. If it runs out, it'll just go to the next spool and continue on. But it makes it so much easier to put it through. As I said, I'd have to put it into the heating unit, thread it out of there, thread it into a tube, from that tube into the sensor to know that there's filament, up that tube, down into the head, click the tube back into the head to lock it into place, lock the head back into place to get to a print. Here with the CFS, all you have to do is, with it on, feed your filament into the tube, the unit grabs it and goes. It also handles the retraction process. Poop spits out of the back of it, so keep that in mind. Those little bits of plastic that'll be coming out of the back of your K2. But it handles all of that for you. And now you might be thinking, when you do printing, it's a layer by layer thing, which it is. However, with the color printers, you can paint your object in your slicer. So, for example, they have these little cat-shaped self-defense units. I was able to paint the ears on one black. It would, as it got to that point, change out the color. So the unit knows that it's going to have to use this different color and handles all of that changeover for you. If I were to do this by hand with, let's say, the Ender, I'm not sure how I would go about doing it because it's not a layer. If I was doing half red and half blue, for example, when it got to the blue point, the printer would have to stop at that layer, allow me to swap out the red for the blue, and then I'd start it back up again. And then it would continue on to do the blue. Here, the ears were red, but the cat was black. So the body of the cat was black, and it's a flat two-dimensional object, relatively speaking. So it needed to not only not do it on a layer basis, it has to lay down the layer, but every time it got to a layer, it was going to have to change out the color. And it did it. It just chugged through and did it and printed out the cat. So there was nothing I needed to do because I had that filament system. Now, the K2 itself. The K2 has been fantastic. There is setup that has to occur with it, and it's over 100 pounds in weight. So bear that in mind. Whatever you're going to put it on, better be able to handle that 100 plus pounds, and you have to be able to lift it up and put it there. All right. With a single CFS, it sits on top. When you're going multiple, you're going to have a shelving thing on the side to put the 4 of them there. K2 allows you to do other colors because it's an enclosed heated unit, or not other colors, but other materials. Being an enclosed heated unit, it means it'll limit the amount of possible warping you can get from other materials because it's always warm. Right. I love my ender. I'm still using it. I'm using it for lithophanes, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But the ender is a single print system. Now, I say that, and you might think, well, why can't you just hook one of these units up to it? The printer has to be able to communicate with the unit to tell it what it needs. And while the K2 and the new one that they're coming out with is set up to handle that communication, the old Ender 3, version 3, is not. It has a USB port on it, which it uses for the camera, so you can keep an eye on what it's doing, but that's the extent of what you get out of it. Both of them would work well for a lithophane. The difference is the Ender 2 is a 220 by 220 millimeter. The K2 is a 350 by 350. Plus, as I said, you can use other materials in the K2. And part of that is the warping, but the other part is you have to pay attention to what the fumes can do to you coming out of one of these printers. And that might mean that you have to put some filtration in place to protect yourself. You don't want to become sick just because you wanted to do print. But let's talk about what a lithophane is. A lithophane is an image printed in plastic. Now, there's two ways you can print an image in plastic. One is just you want it to look like a three-dimensional representation of the person. So you take a picture and you put it in there. And you say, I want the dark stuff to be the thinnest, right? The farthest away from you. And I want the rest of it to extrude. Now, perfect example is a human nose, right? The nose extrudes from the face. The darker part, where you see the shadow, is closer to the face. We're using the same principle here. And if you look at a photograph and it has any three-dimensional quality to it, that probably means that the person took the time to do a little dodge and burn. Basically, dodging makes things lighter and burning makes things darker. And if you've got a face and you do a little bit of burning, which is to just make it a little bit darker around the nose and around the face itself, that helps set it out from the rest of the photograph and gives it that three-dimensional image. You also do it in other places around the eyebrows and things like that, but I won't bore you with the technicals on that. I cover that over on the Let's Talk Photography podcast. But with a lithophane, you're taking an image, preferably a really good black and white image, so you don't have to rely on the product that you're using to do that for you. And you're creating basically a reverse of what you want to see. So, like I said, your nose would come out of a sculpture, but here you don't want the nose to have as thick as the hair if it's dark hair. And that's because when light comes through it, the thicker the material that it's got to go through, the darker it is. So if you have somebody who's got dark hair, it's going to be a really thick piece where the hair is, whereas the whites of the eyes are going to be really, really, really thin because you want the light to come in around where the eyes are. The eyebrow ridges are going to be darker. The iris is going to be darker. So you're dealing just with like a binary thing. If it's dark in the image, you want it to be thicker, and if it's not, you want it to be thinner. The lithophane itself is like a magic trick. Because of that reversing of your dark and light, it really doesn't look like a heck of a lot of anything when you look at it without it being backlit. But as soon as it's backlit, the magic happens. Now, there are several ways that you can work with these. You could put it in a window, right? When the light comes through the window, you're able to see the lithophane. What I did is I got a inexpensive cube light from Amazon, and I designed a top and a bottom for the lamp. Now, my original design was just to put a single panel into the lamp and the rest of it be a normal lamp. But I've come to realize that the other sides can be utilized in a way that for the person I'm making it for, she can turn it and have a certain face facing her. Now, I could put one on the top as well, but I'm not going to do that because then you'd have to look down on the cube. The cube itself is charged from the bottom, so I have to be careful of leaving that open. So I created a square frame that goes around it. And at the front of the frame, at the top is a slot, and at the bottom is a slot that has a bottom to it, so that the lithophanes can be slid into that slot. And then when you turn the light on, voila, you've got the magic. And I can put that on all four sides. So I'm working on getting that to be exactly what I want. For me, right now, it's a 1 millimeter thick piece of plastic. The way I designed it is I go into the, I'm using Tinkercad, and I have the size that I want in 1 millimeter. I then create whatever I want to put on it and just lay that over the top. Now, I have not been doing lithophanes this way. I'm doing other things this way because there's a bunch of other stuff you can do. You can put somebody's name that way. You can do their name in color where the background is white, but their name is in red or blue or purple. There's a lot of things you can do to make something unique for someone. So it doesn't have to be an image of them, for example, like a traditional lithophane. It could be a flower, right? You could make a rose and have the rose printed in red, and every time the light's turned on, you'll see that rose pop out. Now, when you're talking colored, it makes it a little bit different, again, because you're looking at it. The color helps you determine the image that's there, as opposed to a traditional lithophane, which is just black and white. But let's say you have a newborn. You could make a lithophane of your newborn depending on whether you took the picture, you had a photographer take the picture, have them come up with a black and white version of it. There are sites online like Lithophane Maker, and Creality has a Lithophane off of their Creality cloud that will take that image and convert it into a lithophane. Now, those make a more or less self-contained type of lithophane, different than what I was doing with the lamp, right? Because they're going to make a piece for you. And if you're going to use that, then there's a couple things you probably want to take a look at, and that is, what do you want to do with that image? Tinkercad will allow you to take that STL image that these generate and put it on that background. So you could create your background. I think mine's like 130 wide by 150 tall. And I could take one of these STLs, have my 1 millimeter there already, and just drop it onto it. Now, if you're going to do that, bear in mind that you're starting off already with a mil worth of plastic. If you then take your STL and just put it on top, it's going to add to that. So what you can do is be mindful of how you're setting it up, but you could push that STL down just a little bit so it's not sitting 1 millimeter above the object. It's tucked in just a little bit, which will give you that just a little bit more light to come in those lighter areas in your lithophane. And again, you now have a template that you can then slide in. For example, what I've got, a slot, drop it into the bottom slot. The frame is just top and bottom. I don't have any side frames on it, and I have a lamp. In addition to that, because of the way I've designed it, there'll be a little bit of an edge of light that comes in around the outside edges of all of them, and I can put a image on all 4 sides, which will allow me to, as I said, give the person I'm making it for a way to turn the cube and have whichever image that she wants to be facing her at that time there. She has 4 images, right? In her case, there's going to be about a dozen, but there'll be 3 images she can turn toward her and still have another 9 images that she can turn and look at another time. And again, because of the way I've got this set up, you could get away with a lamp and a dozen of these images and just slide them in and out as you want them. So there's a lot of things you can do with lithophane. It's a little bit on the technical side from the photography standpoint, but the tools online are doing a pretty good job of setting it up. The only quibble I've got with what I've done so far is that it has a tendency to really pick up any kind of differences, or they're not imperfections in the skin, they're just the way the light's hitting the skin. And because of that, it means that they're a little bit distracting. It may have some extra material there that you're seeing that kind of detracts from the subject. So if you're going to have a photographer do it for you, you want to point that out to them. If they don't know what a lithophane is, when they turn their black and white image into a lithophane capable image, you want to have them do a little bit of skin smoothing. Right? In some cases, it's as simple as just adding a little bit of a blur to like an arm or something like that while keeping the face sharp. In other cases, depending, you may have to go a little bit more on that. And a lot of that's going to depend on the way the light was hitting the person and everything else. You want them to be like a reverse silhouette. You want the details, but at the same time, you don't want any of the distractions that go along with some of those. So that's what I got for you guys this week. Next week, maybe we'll talk about the fact that I 3D printed some ground feeders using some milk crates as bases, and built a feeder system out of PVC pipe and some printed materials. So for now, just want to talk about the K2s, filament systems to help you feed your filaments in and out much easier than doing it by hand, and how well the K2 is doing. One final note, though, the Ender 3 did have a jam at one point, which had basically made the filament go back up around the head. And while I had gotten a lot of it out, I didn't get all of it and didn't notice it, and it was giving me some errors. By going back to by looking it up, found out it was just $28 for the head, which is, of course, a lot cheaper than the unit itself. So I bought a new heating block, popped it in, easy, and then I realized when I pulled the head out completely, there were some bits that were still left in there that I had not seen and had not removed. So just a note, if your printer has an issue, don't bother trying to fix it. Just find a nice replacement part for it and go from there. I'll talk to you guys next week.